Hey everyone, Joe Waxman here, and in this video, I want to talk about retrogrades and stations, and I want to go through all the planets and talk about individual charts that have these and what these mean. So let's get started. I'm gonna share my screen. All right. So first thing, I wanted to show you what a retrograde looks like. There's two different kinds of retrogrades. Two classes of retrogrades. The first is with Mercury and Venus because they are inside the orbit of the Earth. And then Mars through all the other planets, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they are outside the orbit of the Earth. So they're different. But let's look at Mercury. Follow Mercury here. It's got a little RX, means it's going retrograde. And so the sun is traveling counterclockwise, and the retrograde will be going clockwise. I'm taking it one day at a time. You can see that Mercury is still retrograde. Meanwhile, Venus is direct. Okay, let's go back. So here Mercury's retrograde. And now it just, I'm not saying station, but yeah, it's stationing direct right there. And it's not that far away. You can see it's not actually a maximum elongation yet, but because now it's starting to go direct, and it's moving very slowly while the sun is moving faster. So it's actually still moving farther away from the sun. You can see now it's starting to catch up and go back. And now just it's conjunct the sun, and that's what we call cazimi. It's also combust. Well, cazimi is a separate class, but when it's this close to the sun, it's combust the sun. You can't see it in the daytime sky. And so now it's separating from the sun, going direct. And now it's retrograde again. And so now it's going back. And that's a full cycle of Mercury. And that Mercury is the quickest. Venus cycle will be a lot longer. But you can see that when it's retrograde, like it is now, it is traveling on the close side of the Earth. So it's closest to the Earth when it's retrograde, going the opposite way of the sun. It's traveling away from the sun. And then when it goes direct, it's on the far side of the sun. So that's the cycle. Now we can track, let's do Saturn, since Saturn's here, and I'm going to change it to weeks. So I don't want to take it too long, but look, Sun to Saturn. Saturn just passed. We can back up there. So Sun and Saturn are pretty much conjunct. I have it set to the weeks, so we're going to move a little quicker here. But Sun passing through Saturn, and then watch Saturn retrograde. See, when it gets to essentially, it's pretty much going to be a trine, or about a trine. It starts to go retrograde. And because the sun is moving faster than Saturn, Saturn just sort of the relationship between Sun and Saturn slows down till it gets to opposition. So anytime a planet, one of these outer planets, is opposite the Sun, it's going to be retrograde. Now the Sun's moving closer and closer. And now Saturn is moving direct again. And Sun is catching up to Saturn because Saturn is slower than the Sun. The Sun's moving faster than Saturn. So now they're conjunct again. So that's one full cycle. And the cycles, so when it's see, when Venus or any of the planets are on, besides the moon, not the moon, but when any of the planets are on this side of the Sun, the right side, they're starting their cycle. All the planets besides the moon. And when they're on this side of the sun, they're ending their cycle. So Saturn's just ending the cycle. Mercury's starting a new cycle. Venus starting a new cycle. Or, well, Venus would have been starting a new cycle when it was conjunct the Sun. Mars is relatively close to a new cycle. So by this synodic cycle, you can decide how young or old the planet is. And an old planet is going to behave differently than a younger planet. And a planet in retrograde is sort of like in between. That's, remember, opposite the Sun, except for Mercury and Venus. But the retrogrades show a contrary quality, a rebellion. And just to demonstrate this, we're going to go through each of the planets and look at different charts that have strong representations of these retrogrades or stations. Now, not everyone who I've listed here is going to be as obvious with the retrograde planets, but overall, you're going to see a trend that will make sense, because not everyone has it. Like there's many different signs and houses and aspects and conjunctions. You know, if it's closer to the ascendant, it's going to be more obvious. Conjunct the moon or the Sun, or you know, in tight aspect to any of the personal planets or points. So let's look at this. For Mercury, I'm going to pull up, let me, oops, excuse me. I'm going to share my AstroDense screen because I still have a lot of charts on here. So this is JFK's chart, and he has Mercury station direct. So a stationary Mercury is, remember, it was going retrograde, now it's going direct. He was born when it was just going direct. So stationary Mercury is going to be very potent. Any planet that is stationary is standing still, and it's going to have it becomes very strong. And so for John F. Kennedy, it was his speaking ability and his intellect was very strong. But also, so here's my list of retrogrades, and I'm going to tell you who's retrograde and who's stationary. So Candace Owens is retrograde. JFK is stationary direct. The chart of the USA is retrograde. This is all Mercury. Amy Winehouse, Mercury retrograde. Tony Robbins, stationary retrograde. Jimmy Page, Mercury retrograde. Osho, Rajneesh Osho, the philosopher, the guru, stationary retrograde. Michael Jackson, retrograde. Dali, Salvador Dali, the painter, retrograde. Paul McCartney, retrograde. Miley Cyrus, retrograde. Keanu Reeves, retrograde. George Carlin, retrograde. Clint Eastwood, retrograde. Groucho Marx. All of these are retrograde. So I'll just stick to that. I'll just name them. Groucho Marx, Steve Jobs, J.R. Tolkien, Aldous Huxley, Gordon Ramsay, Madonna, and Steve Martin. So you can see that all these people, when they're retrograde, they have a quality of verbal rebellion, so to speak, or either rebellion or like skill. in any case, the Mercury is accentuated in some way. They're not behaving normally. Like for instance, we have a good example of here of a stationary Mercury. And the stationary Mercuries tend to be very brilliant, right? Because Mercury is the intellect. Brilliant and sometimes excellent with their hands. But let's look at here. Madonna. I'm choosing Madonna because her Mercury is right on her ascendant within 3 degrees. So it's Mercury retrograde in Virgo, right on her ascendant. She's a good example of somebody who's like a Mercury, like she has this edgy quality, right? She always like wants to say things that are a little bit edgy, a little bit, going against the grain. Her fashion, her style, because it's the ascendant, so how she appears. She'll do things like kissing Britney Spears on stage, or do Mercury is not a very big planet. It's the closest to the sun, so it's very personal. It's not like her retrograde is not really. It's just kind of it's superficial. So she's not. She tries to be edgy, but she's only like superficially edgy. She's not really edgy, right? And we'll see good examples of this as we go down. People who are really edgy, and they have much stronger planets that are retrograde on the ascendant or in critical positions. But like also, there's this story of like her meeting Boy George, and Boy George is like put out his hand to shake her hand, and she's like, "Ew, I'm not gonna shake your hand. I don't know where it's been." So that's like Mercury retrograde. If you look at these other people like Gordon Ramsay, Groucho Marx, Steve Jobs, Clint Eastwood, George Carlin, and then these writers, J.R.R. Tolkien, Aldous Huxley, Paul McCartney with his, guitar playing, right? So Jimmy Page, Amy Winehouse, these are all people, Candace Owens, with you can feel their Mercury retrograde. It's a Mercury that's going against the grain. Okay. Venus, and there are not very many examples of Venus retrograde, but I have a few here. Amy Winehouse has her Venus stationary direct, and that's a great example. Let's pull that one up. Because of her fashion, right? Because of her artistic and musical ability and her fashionability. I mean, it's also North Node conjunct the ascendant, but her Venus, it's also in Leo. Venus stationary direct. That means it was just going retrograde. Now it's about to go direct. And her fashion is just way like, I mean, talk about original and unique and just being totally her own person. It's not a stationary planet is neither going against the grain or going with the crowd, which is what direct is. It's just going with the flow, agreeable, going with the flow, not breaking any rules. Stationary planet is just completely independent. It's just focused, still doing its own thing, neither going against or going with. But Venus retrograde are Hitler, interestingly enough. And I was thinking about Hitler, and I was like, how does that make sense? Well, one thing that Venus can represent is food, and he was a vegetarian, believe it or not. He was a vegetarian who ate eggs and chocolate. Jack Nicholson, the actor. And Jack Nicholson, I mean, I don't know. Intuitively, I can just sort of feel that it makes sense. Alex Jones and Anthony Bourdain, all three of those have Venus retrograde. I'd like to find more examples of Venus retrograde, but there's actually not very many examples that I could find of Venus retrograde. But Venus retrograde would tend to have, the guys are not going to represent the fashion quality as much as the women will, but these are going to have people who are independent styles, and they're going to have, their taste, their sense, their Venus, their personal things that they enjoy are going to be going against the grain. So Amy Winehouse is the best I could come up with here. But Mars, let's go to Mars. So Mars retrograde. There's actually one, before I get to that, there's only one stationary direct, and that's Jimmy Page. So let's pull his chart up. Jimmy Page, the guitar player. Excellent. He was as a kid, my all-time favorite guitar player. And Mars rules that, the technical ability, and it doesn't rule the hands like Mercury rules the hands, but it rules technical, mechanical ability and passion, right? And aggression. So he has Mars stationary direct right here, conjunct Uranus. But Claire Wineland, and probably a lot of people don't know who she is, but she was a YouTuber who died of I forget what it's called, some terminal illness, but I mean she's pretty much she's great. She's very passionate, a real fighter. But Martin Luther King, Mozart, Beethoven, George Carlin, Jack Nicholson, Michael Jordan, James Dean, and Dolly Parton all have their Mars retrograde. And so Mars retrograde represents fighters, and obviously musicians as well, right? Mozart, Beethoven, Dolly Parton, obviously not all musicians, but a few of them, they have their Mars retrograde. And so some very passionate people. Martin Luther King was a fighter, for civil rights. George Carlin, very, he was anti-establishment. He had that strong fighting mentality. Jack Nicholson plays a great bad guy. Michael Jordan, excellent. I mean, one of the greatest athletes of all time. James Dean, rebel without a cause. And yeah, Dolly Parton, musician again. So yeah, that is Mars retrograde. Their sense of what they're fighting and their passion is counter to the norm. But there are many more fighters who have other planets retrograde, as we will see. Now Jupiter, there's quite a few examples. I'm going to pull. So Jupiter, really good one for Jupiter stationary direct is everyone's favorite ex-president, Donald Trump. And what's really unique about Donald Trump's chart is that Jupiter and Neptune are stationary direct in the second house, right? The second house having to do with money, resources. Jupiter, Jupiter, the great benefic, I mean, it's Neptune as well. Neptune's not a benefic, but wealth, stationary Jupiter. I mean, come on. But yeah, so retrograde Jupiters are Joe Biden, Kurt Cobain, Bach, Picasso, Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page. Osho has a stationary retrograde Jupiter. Bruce Lee, Robert Plant has stationary direct Jupiter. Hitler has stationary retrograde Jupiter. Prince, Mel Gibson, Rudolph Steiner, Whitney Houston has stationary retrograde Jupiter. Elon Musk, L. Ron Hubbard, John Lennon, Karl Marx, and Obama. And Jupiter represents our philosophy, our faith, our religion. And with a retrograde Jupiter is going to produce either somebody who's non-religious or somebody who believes in religion in a different way than the norm. It could be, for example, like Karl Marx was a communist socialist. He was not a religious person, right? John Lennon and Obama and L. Ron Hubbard. These were all non-religious people. L. Ron Hubbard developed his own religion. Elon Musk, right? And some of these people who have the stationary Jupiter, are, like Whitney Houston has it in the second house, similar to Donald Trump. But the other thing about the second house is that it can also represent a voice. So Whitney Houston had this incredible voice, Jupiter stationary in the second house. Robert Plant had stationary direct Jupiter in the first house in Sagittarius, right? It just made him this bigger than life character and contributed to this, phenomenal voice because its influence, the first house influences the second house. Hitler, stationary retrograde. So like on the contrary, on the other side of things, we have somebody like Hitler who's his Jupiter was in Capricorn, so he's not religious, and his philosophy is, it's his Jupiter is becoming very empowered, but not in a religious way. Interestingly enough, Obama also has his Jupiter in Capricorn. So if you think Obama's some great religious figure, he's lying. Let me tell you that. Osho, stationary retrograde. Osho was brilliant man. And had a phenomenal following, and he was a spiritual guru, but he was he was very neutral. Stationary retrograde Jupiter, so make that of what you will. It's really interesting. Mel Gibson claims to be like this raging Christian, but he has a very different view of Christianity than normal. It's not, it's retrograde, so it's got to be different. There's something very different about his relationship to religion than the normal. He's not going along with the flow, and we can see that he's like hyper religious. So it's like, I'm not trying to put any answers for us. I'm posing a pattern and a bunch of different situations that we can sort of squint and see something forming. So like Mel Gibson is taking a Jupiter retrograde, and we'd have to analyze each chart separately to sort of figure it out. But what I'm getting at is that it means something, right? There's something here. Mel Gibson is taking Jupiter retrograde, and it's going in the other direction. He's not becoming a-religious, he's becoming extra religious, right? Rudolf Steiner was a spiritual teacher, anthroposophy, and an occultist. So he also had his Jupiter retrograde. In any case, Jupiter retrograde these are people who are thinking about religion in a very different way. Now it depends if it's in Sagittarius or Capricorn or Gemini or Pisces or Cancer. Depends a lot on what sign it's in. Right. Elon Musk is not religious. He's got his Jupiter retrograde. So that's really interesting. Now, Saturn. So Kim Solons has Saturn stationary. Joe Biden has and I'm just going to say that I'm not going to say retrograde. I'm just going to say the names, and if it's stationary, I'll say that. So retrograde Joe Biden, Jeffrey Wolf Green, who is a evolutionary astrologer. Well, he's the one who created evolutionary astrology. Aleister Crowley, Bach, Picasso, J.D. Rockefeller, Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, Leonardo da Vinci, Michael Jackson had a stationary direct. Michael Jackson's a really good one to look at. Because he had his Saturn stationary conjunct the MC. Now, Saturn represents authority. It represents leadership, rules, and he was considered the king of pop. Saturn being stationary, direct conjunct the MC. The dignity is not, it's like, okay, I guess. Does it have an aspect from Jupiter? Not so much. But it is stationary, and so he gains the title of the king of pop. Even though Saturn is not the king, it is leadership, it is authority. So in his chart, it is somehow making him kingly. Well, the sun is king, and that's basically conjunct the descendant. But yeah, a stationary Saturn is going to have tons and tons of authority, because that's the station creates very potent planet. Very authoritarian. Bruce Lee, retrograde. Hemingway, Krishnamurti, the philosopher, Jerry Lewis. Hitler had stationary direct. So again, we're seeing the king of pop and the king of killing Jews. Stationary in Leo, basically in the same position as Michael Jackson. And these were two very authoritarian people in different ways, right? King of the Nazis, king of pop. I mean, they both had their son conjunct the descendant, basically. So, you know, really interesting. Bob Marley, Prince, Beethoven, Rudolf Steiner, Keanu Reeves, J.R.R. Tolkien, stationary retrograde. Another king, king of science fiction. You know, J.R.R. Tolkien wrote the Ring trilogy, The Hobbit, and all that. Sean Connery has a Saturn retrograde conjunct the ascendant. Do you know how when any time a planet is retrograde conjunct the ascendant, like Hitler has Uranus retrograde conjunct the ascendant. By the way, I have Uranus retrograde conjunct the ascendant. I know Hitler though. Sean Connery, let's just pull his chart up. Saturn retrograde conjunct the ascendant. You know how prickly he is, right? There's even like this video of him just being like this beast of a man, talking about how it's appropriate to slap a woman if you exhaust all the other, you know, every other you know, option. That's your last option. She's becoming unreasonable. It's okay to slap her, right? It's pretty impressive, right? I mean, that's like somebody who's like taking this authoritarian stance and just being contrary, completely contrary. That's retrograde. It's contrary to the direction of society, right? It's not going with the flow. It's going against the flow. So he's taking this very Saturnian, it's Saturn in Capricorn. He's just being a boss. He's being like this manly boss, and he doesn't even care if you like him. And yeah, it's if you watch that video, it's like it's just kind of shocking, but like awe-inspiring at the same time that he can get away with it. Like you can't get away with that if you're not going to be like you know, Saturn retrograde in Capricorn conjunct your ascendant. You know, you're not going to be able to do that unless you have like Sean Connery's chart, basically, or something very similar, right? So that's Saturn retrograde. So you see Saturn station and Saturn retrograde. Saturn station has this incredible authority. Saturn retrograde is authority. Well, plus it depends on the dignity. Here, Sean Connery is, you know, in domicile retrograde, conjunct his ascendant. So he's, you know, that dignified Saturn that is also retrograde. Fascinating. So the next one is Uranus. So I do have Uranus retrograde conjunct my ascendant in Scorpio. And I'll just use myself as an example for a moment. I'll even pull up my own chart. Because I just want to explain that ever since I was a teenager, I was extremely rebellious. I was into metal and punk. I had a double mohawk. I was always doing my hair in different weird ways. I had like over 10 piercings in my ears. I pierced my nose at one time. I had a leather jacket. I was always anti-establishment, always rebellious, always political, always social. I don't want to say antisocial, but like social, rebelliously social. against the norm, against the grain. And so a retrograde Uranus is going to be thinking about society, because that's Uranus, thinking about the world, politics, social issues, and it's going to be contrary. It's going to be rebellious, right? Let's pull up another example. Oh, here's a great one. Kurt Cobain. Pluto and Uranus conjunct the ascendant. Now, can we get any more rebellious than Kurt Cobain? I dare you to go watch an interview with Kurt Cobain, and you can feel it. You can feel the Pluto conjunct Uranus in his ascendant. He's just like, there's something extremely critical about Kurt Cobain, like dangerous, like a bomb waiting to go off. Like, just go watch a video of an interview of his, and you'll understand. Like, you'll see, like, he's just waiting to destroy himself, and anyone who he can with him. I mean, that's what the Pluto. It's way more intense than Uranus on its own. Like, I do not envy Kurt Cobain, as brilliant a musician as he was. He was just a ticking time bomb. I mean, an amazing chart, but like, I mean, so explosive, so critical, so like, you knew there was just like, there were consequences for being Kurt Cobain. There were just like dramatic consequences. And that's what I wanted to say when you talk about like Mercury retrograde versus like these outer planets, Uranus and Pluto retrograde conjunct these, there's no comparison. Like, you want to talk like it's almost like Madonna's just like a faux edginess compared to somebody like Kurt Cobain, who's just like, wants to destroy everything, right? I mean, it's crazy. So Uranus retrograde, Candace Owens, Joe Biden, Albert Einstein, Edgar Casey, Jeffrey Wolf Green, the astrologer, Kurt Cobain, J.D. Rockefeller, who had it conjunct his North Node, Tony Robbins, Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, Osho, Bruce Lee, Sylvia Plath, Ernest Hemingway, Krishnamurti, Jim Carrey, Hitler, Bob Marley, Beethoven, Mel Gibson, Salvador Dali, George Orwell, Alex Jones, and Bill Hicks. And the few that had it stationary direct or stationary retrograde were JFK, Elvis Presley, and Aldous Huxley. Now you can see some of these people, it's less obvious and some more obvious, but all of these people, like if you put it all together, there's a heightened awareness when Mercury is retrograde or direct, or sorry, stationary. Because you're getting into, when a planet is retrograde, like it starts questioning itself, it starts reflecting upon itself. If you take the synodic cycle to be the maturing of a planet, then when it's new, it's direct. Then it goes into the retrograde phase. This is like the maturing. This is the rebellious phase of the planet. It's opposite the sun. It is questioning everything. It's moving in a different direction than the sun, and it is it's just becoming rebellious and going against the grain, becoming independent, gaining its own maturity. Right, so that's how, and Uranus is a planet of awareness. It's considered the Great Awakener. So when Uranus is retrograde, that's these people are starting to really gain a lot of awareness about society. They're waking up to society as a whole, to politics, to social issues, to the big picture of life. So that's what you get when Uranus is either stationary or retrograde. By the way, stationary direct is more evolved than stationary retrograde, because stationary retrograde will happen over here at the initial retrograde. Stationary direct will happen over here when it's just coming out of retrograde and it's about to go direct, more mature. Okay. But yeah, that is Uranus. And by the way, like, I'm incredibly aware of the world and the goings on in the world. And if you're paying attention to my videos, you're probably getting a lot of that. Like, I know who's the Like, I know, I'm aware, I'm not asleep, I'm awake. That's what Uranus retrograde does. It wakes you up. All right, let's move on. Neptune. Let me find a good example. Let's go to Beethoven. Now, Neptune is different than Uranus because Neptune more deals with the imagination, right? And so when Neptune is either stationary or retrograde, it's going to change the way the person, it's going to alter their creativity. It's going to heighten it in a certain sense, but it's also going to make it very unique and different. Beethoven has his Neptune. It doesn't say right here, but it is stationary retrograde. It's just about to go retrograde. And you can sense that in Beethoven's music. If you listen to Beethoven, you can see a very refined sense of imagination and creativity, very heightened, right? So people with Neptune retrograde are, and it's not going to be completely obvious with all of these, but some will be more obvious than others. And again, it depends how it's aspected, what sign it's in, what house it's in, what points it's touching, what planets. So Candace Owens, Nikola Tesla, Aleister Crowley, Picasso, J.D. Rockefeller, Ram Dass, Tony Robbins, Leonardo da Vinci, Elvis Presley, Martin Luther King, Jerry Lewis, Bob Marley, Prince, Mozart, Bob Dylan, Elon Musk, and L. Ron Hubbard. And those are all retrograde. Now for the stationary direct, I just want to separate just because it's easier. Donald Trump, stationary direct. Kurt Cobain, stationary retrograde. Jimmy Page, stationary retrograde. Osho, stationary retrograde. Beethoven, stationary retrograde. So I think we can put these people together and say that there's something very unique and developed about their sense of imagination. You're getting a lot of musicians here, artists, and imaginary, thinkers. Like Tesla comes to mind. Tesla, a huge part of what Tesla did was because of his imagination, right? So his Neptune is retrograde. So now he's able to imagine things in a unique, different way, a way that's going against the grain, right? And you can't become original and thinking outside the box and inventive if you're not thinking out of the ordinary. Let me pull up another chart here. Picasso is a great example of stellium of retrogrades. Look, sun's here. Look at all these planets, retrograde. Pluto, Jupiter, Chiron, Neptune, Saturn. Now think about his paintings, right? They were very retrograde, like eyes and nose and everything's twisted and distorted and, disturbed. That's retrograde. It's going backwards. Not only that, these are all outer planets. Well, they have to be, I mean, you can't have Venus and Mercury out here, but I mean, you can feel that it's all in Taurus. Taurus is the sign of the arts, right? Of beauty. So we get, you just get a feeling like of the nose and the eyes and the faces and it's all distorted and disturbed. And that's the retrograde feeling. So next time you look at a Picasso, just think about all those planets retrograde. All right. Yeah. Now Pluto, I already gave you a good example of Pluto, but we'll go through it anyway. Let me pull up another chart of Pluto. Sylvia Plath, we'll go for. Now, for those of you who don't know Sylvia Plath, you probably should know, but she was an excellent poet and author who actually killed herself. But before she killed herself, she made fantastic poetry. like really powerful, really deep, really potent. So Pluto here in the 5th house. It's in Cancer, so very emotional, very deep retrograde Pluto. So destructive tendency, very deep feeling. Pluto retrogrades are going to be, really potentially like going into the deep, dark waters and, you know, destructive potential, really exploring that. And hers was stationary, mind you, stationary retrograde. So it's just starting to go just starting to go retrograde. Very potent. But all right, so the retrogrades are Candace Owens, Claire Wyland, Joe Biden, the USA chart. I mean, we're pretty destructive, I think. Jeffrey Wolf Green, Aleister Crowley, Kurt Cobain, who had it on his ascendant, Pablo Picasso, Ram Dass had it stationary direct, Tony Robbins, Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, Osho, Elvis, Bruce Lee, Martin Luther King, Jim Carrey, Jerry Lewis, the comedian, had it on his ascendant, Bob Marley, Mel Gibson, and Bill Hicks. So Pluto is probably going to be a little less obvious because it's so far out there, but when it's retrograde, I also have mine retrograde. It's going to create something very, very deep, that's deeply defiant and deeply going against the grain. It's going to be more hidden because Pluto can be quite a hidden planet unless it's prominent, very prominent in the chart. I mean, I'd say a good example again of both Pluto and Uranus is Kurt Cobain, because they're conjunct the ascendant. I mean, Jerry Lewis should be a good example, but he was a comedian, so it's kind of obfuscated, I think, with Jerry Lewis. But I think that he was, anyway. Sylvia Plath is good. Pluto stationary example. Go read some of her poetry. I think you'll feel her very intense Pluto quality. Plus, she had a Scorpio sun and Mercury, but a lot of people have Plutos. Scorpio suns and Mercuries, and they're not quite as heavy as and intense as Sylvia Plath. So there's more to it than that. There's the most retrograde of all. Let me pull up my Astro Gold again. I'm going to open Muhammad Ali's chart. Now you can't really tell here, but well, I guess you can. He had Neptune. The nodes are always retrograde, so that doesn't count. Neptune, Chiron, Pluto, Jupiter, Uranus, Saturn. Mars is not retrograde, even though you think it might be. Venus, but Mars is slow. And so Muhammad Ali was not just a boxer. He also was a fighter of the government, right? He and a fighter of religion. He changed his name. He changed his religion. He fought all the boxers, and he fought the government too. He protested the draft and the war. So he was fighting against everyone and everything. And that's retrograde. That's all these planets in retrograde. He was the most retrograde that I found. There could be more, obviously, but as far as I know, I could be checking for days to find more retrograde, maybe. But anyway, out of all the ones that I checked, he's the most retrograde, and you can feel it in his personality. Like he's just all against everyone and everything. Like just pure retrograde fighting spirit, right? And that's admirable. It's also very difficult, right? Because we don't want to just be fighting all our life. On the alternate side of things, there are people who have no retrogrades, and that's equally interesting. Vincent van Gogh. Now look at his paintings and just feel how direct it is. All planets direct, nothing retrograde. Van Gogh, beautiful, beautiful artist. Robert Plant, the one of the greatest singers and leaders of a band of all time, right? Plus, he had the stationary Jupiter right on his ascendant in Sagittarius. Now, here's another one who you might not guess. Let me get to him at the end. More stationary no retrogrades. Sorry, no retrogrades. Jerry Garcia, singer and lead guitarist of the Grateful Dead. Now, how beautiful is Grateful? Maybe you don't like the Grateful Dead. A lot of people do. But how smooth is the Grateful Dead? How smooth is Jerry Garcia? Completely smooth, nothing retrograde. Like, just compare, like almost all retrograde, Muhammad Ali to the smoothness of Jerry Garcia, right? Robin Williams. Now, Robin Williams had some problems, but incredibly smooth, incredibly nice person. Incredible, like he was just all smile. Like you just get this complete, like this feeling of just like, I mean, he had depression, right? But like just very, very direct. No, you have to feel this, right? Robin Williams, no, all direct. Kim Kardashian, maybe you hate her, maybe you don't like her at all, but very smooth. Nothing retrograde about her. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes, right? Brilliant and completely smooth. He's not at all like Sherlock Holmes, like the character. He's just a completely smooth character, right? These are all direct. Billie Holiday had Neptune stationary direct, but otherwise all direct. And interestingly, Neptune relates to drugs and alcohol, and that's the one issue that she had. Maybe not the only issue she had, let's be honest, but that was her main issue. Drugs and alcohol. I think it was mainly heroin. Was it alcohol as well? I don't remember. But otherwise, completely direct. And her music is so smooth, besides that little bit of, well, the Neptune is stationary, but you can feel that. I can feel that. Britney Spears, all direct except for Chiron. Same with Nicki Minaj, all direct except for Chiron. And they have a very smooth, like Nicki Minaj is just flow. And Britney Spears is, not my kind of music, either of them, but, very smooth, very smooth. Rocky, Sylvester Stallone. Hey, you. Adrian. I mean, he speaks for himself. I mean, Sylvester Stallone, he's got a beautiful physique, and he's all direct planets. Arnold Schwarzenegger, same thing. Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger are like, I don't want to say twins, but they're very similar, right? They have a very similar career path, right? In a lot of ways. And one bad thing I can say about all direct planets is that when planets are all direct, they want other people to be direct. And if they're going to go against anything, it's against people who are not going with the flow. So Arnold Schwarzenegger did piss me off when he was like, screw your freedoms, do what you're told. Because when planets are all direct, they want to go with the flow. So they're going to do what they're told. That's the dark side of planets when they're direct. And the final one, who is all direct, who is kind of shocking, and I'm going to pull up his chart. Here we go. Is Mussolini, the dictator. Now that's kind of a shocker. And I say that for the end because you probably wouldn't guess. It goes against the grain. It's like Mussolini, but he wasn't smooth. He was a killer and a dictator and a tyrant. Yes, he was, but he's also. Tell me what synodic phase all these planets are in besides Uranus. These are all new planetary, all his planets are in a new planetary phase, just beginning. He's a baby. Mussolini is a baby who wound up with power. And so he's just a big baby with a, temper tantrum and just like, hey, you don't like me? Screw you. I'm going to kill you and just do what I say. And, you know, I mean, he's a baby. And so the point being is that when planets are new, they're going to be direct, and you have a baby and they're going to be wah wah, do give me what I want, do everything I say, wah. And if they wind up with a lot of power, it's a recipe for disaster. Obviously, like Mussolini, he looks like a baby. Look at his photos of him. He looks like a baby. Plus, he's got Scorpio ascendant. I have Scorpio ascendant. A lot of people have Scorpio ascendant, but Scorpio is about power and control. And if you have a very immature person with Scorpio ascendant and you give them power, they're going to abuse that power. They're just going to be like, give me all the power's mine. Right. And then, the egotistical Leo and Sun in Leo, Mercury in Leo. I mean, come on. So anyway, obviously when planets are all direct, they can go different ways. But when planets are all direct, they're going to be more about going with the flow. And in this case, it's about going with the flow, except going with his flow, doing whatever he says, versus doing whatever the government says or whatever society says. Some people who are all direct, they just want to do what they're told, and they want everyone else to do what they're told, whether they have power or not, right? Like Arnold Schwarzenegger, screw your freedoms, right? I'd rather not, thanks. But when planets are retrograde, they're going to be a lot more rebellious. They're going to go against the grain. They're going to be edgy. They're going to be defiant. They're going to be original, independent. So, yeah, I mean, I think I painted a clear picture of planets direct, planets stationary, and planets retrograde. It's very important to take note of that. Plus, also, you're seeing the difference in the synodic cycle. Somebody whose planets are all direct, but on the other side of the sun, meaning very old planets, very mature planets, that's going to be a very mature person, even though it's going to be all direct. They're going to be very at peace, right? When planets are all direct, but they're mature, they've already been through their retrograde, they're going to be very old and very at peace and very wise. And you'll see that more with like enlightened sages and gurus. Let me just, I want to pull up, I haven't checked. I'm just thinking like, I just want to test this and see. Okay, well, this is not, he has a few retrogrades. Okay. But yeah, the outer planets mostly are on this side. Anyway, this is a guru. This is the chart of a guru. But yeah. Anyway, I'm not going to do research on my video. But yeah, that's it for this video. I think it's been long enough and I don't want to stretch it out any longer. But don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share. Go to my website, macroastrology.com. Email me directly, macrogoldmachine@yahoo.com, to book a reading. And leave a comment below if you found this interesting. If you want to say anything at all about this or anything else, go for it. And I will see you again soon. All right, thanks. Bye.